Hello, welcome to the Let's Talk Kids Health Live Show, episode 79. I'm Dr. Narissa Bauer, your host. I'm a behavioral pediatrician and CEO of Let's Talk Kids Health. As you know, the concept of the show is to share information about behavioral health, parenting, and family wellness. Each week, I bring you topics and guests to help me advance this mission so that we can all talk together. Now, let us know that you're here by commenting, liking, or asking questions at any time, and in a little bit, your questions will be asked of my guest. Now, the replay will be immediately available after the broadcast. So if you're watching this and you're like, oh no, I wish so and so could have seen this, don't worry. You can just share the episode with anyone who you think would benefit. And if you don't want to miss future episodes or maybe check out some of my past ones, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Narissa Bauer MD, follow my blog Facebook page, Let's Talk Kids Health, and join my free parenting discussion group. Now, today's topic is all about healthy outcomes from positive experiences with Dr. Robert Sege. Dr. Sege is a professor of pediatrics and medicine at Tufts University School of Medicine, where he directs the Center for Community Engaged Medicine. His extensive speaking and publication list include contributions to the prevention and treatment of child maltreatment and youth violence. He is a graduate of Yale College and received his Ph.D. in biology from MIT and his MD from Harvard Medical School. Bob lives in the Boston area where he and his wife Karen have raised 3 young adult children. Hi, Bob. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, Narissa, thank you so much for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too. Me too. And it's always a pleasure when I have a chance to talk to someone who's so passionate about this topic. And so I know the people who are watching are in for a treat because, I think if you agree that the pandemic and everything that's been happening in our society has just been wearing on everybody's mental health. And I know that this topic can't come soon enough because I think we're sort of all wanting to have hope and really thinking beyond all the doom and gloom that often comes about this topic. I think we've talked on my show about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, why it's important, and obviously we need to do that. But I wanted to have you on because of hope and the work that you do. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Great.
So, I wanted to ask you because, as you know, everything's been happening. The AAP has declared a national mental health emergency. Obviously, COVID is still hanging around. We've got so many things that our kids and parents have been dealing with. And I'm just wondering if you can comment. Think about the other stuff. Like, what kinds of experiences do kids need to thrive?
Great. I want to start out by saying that this is so much fun to talk about because all of us know people who had a really difficult childhood but came out okay. And then if you dig into their history, it's possible to figure out what went right for them. And parents, so much of the time, we worry about what are we doing wrong? How are we messing up this way and that way? But here's the truth. Children need four kinds of experiences to grow up optimally, to have to bounce back if they've gone through trauma, and to become the best adults they can be and the happiest kids. So the four kinds of experiences are relationships. They need safe, secure, nurturing relationships. And for all of us, that starts the moment we're born and we look around and there's the person who gave birth to us, and soon we have relationships, perhaps with a couple of other caregivers, and then with our peers, and then with other children and adults. And those relationships, having those solid relationships that you can count on, are really the first building block of hope. Hope stands for healthy outcomes from positive experiences. The second one, also really simple. It's an environment that's stable and secure and equitable. So there are kind of two sides of this, right? So one is do you have enough food in your belly? Are you worried about losing your housing? Is there heat in the winter? So the physical environment, super important. But the other one is a psychological environment. And we know from school teachers that there's nothing like a positive school environment to allow kids to grow and thrive and express their curiosity. So having an environment that's safe and stable and equitable, where kids can live, learn, and play, is the second kind of experience that we can provide for our children. And the third one is actually really fun. It's engagement. And what that means is doing something where other people would notice if you're there or not. So you feel like you matter and you're contributing to society. So I remember when I was a kid and one of the tasks was to erase the blackboard at the end of the day and clean the erasers. And I've subsequently learned it wasn't because Mrs. Williams was incapable of erasing her own blackboard. She was busy creating a community where we all contributed and it mattered if you did your job or not. And so we know with teenagers, if they're part of an art group or drama or music or sports or a religious thing, um, and they're with a group of kids who notice if they're not there, and adults who coach them, incredibly important because they know that they matter. And we all need to feel like we matter in life. So engagement is really important. And the last one seems so basic, and then it kind of goes against your parent instincts because it's emotional growth. Okay, everybody needs emotional growth, right? But when you watch kids in a playground and they're arguing over the rules or siblings bickering, your first response as an adult is that's really silly. You're wasting your whole recess arguing about that. But what's really going on is kids are learning to take the perspective of another person, to negotiate, and to regulate their own feelings. And that all that social emotional growth, it happens in a lot of environments, but I think for most kids, it's through peer play, it's through interaction, and it's not always beautiful. So adults who think that maybe they're wasting their time, they're actually doing what they need to do to grow emotionally and grow up. And
Mm,
those are the kinds of experiences that kids need. And I hope that as you're listening to this, you think that none of these cost a lot of money. None of them are restricted to any particular group. And many parents are already doing those things or making sure their kids are already doing it. So it's a wonderful thing to know about that these science has really shown that these are the particular kinds of experiences that kids need to thrive.
I thank you for that, and I think those you laid it out so nicely. And one of the things that last one in particular struck me was that, you took a common scenario that happens on the playground when you see like kids sort of quote maybe bickering or even siblings kind of arguing about things, but the way you just said it made it seem like, oh my gosh, it's kind of a mind shift that parents need to think
Right.
about it, right? In a
Yep.
different way.
Yep.
Yeah.
So all those psychologists talk about how children develop a theory of mind. And
Mhm.
they're very, all these wonderful things. They probably know Latin words for it. But what it looks like is the kids are interacting with each other and learning through trial and error that the other person also has a perspective. And the way to have fun is to talk about it and
Mhm.
negotiate it and come up with a good solution. And that's such an important lesson.
It is. It is. And, too, thanks for pointing out like things like the arts, sports, just being part of something larger
Hmm.
is so
Yep.
helpful. It's so
Yep.
helpful. And those soft skills that they learn too as being part of a bigger production or a bigger little piece in a bigger thing is just
Mhm.
so meaningful to kids in this at this day and age too,
Yep. And
social
so
connection.
often, it's really up to the adults to create that environment because we
Mhm.
can't, if we overcoach them or do things for them, then they don't get that feeling of accomplishment and that sense of mattering that they have. And you need to have that pride for doing something that's complicated or having one of your teammates say, that's nice, or I missed you when you were out sick yesterday.
Mhm. Yeah, that sense that you matter and that you're
Yeah.
seen is
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah.
Um, so I kind of want to transition us because obviously there's been a lot of things happening. And in the work that we both do when we've worked together with the American Academy of Pediatrics and other kind of entities like that, where we talk about how it's really important that pediatricians begin to identify as early as possible risk factors like
Yep.
violence, like abuse. Um, and I want us like to think about this because obviously those things do happen.
Hmm.
Divorce and separation happens. There's other types of trauma. And for families out there who are listening, watching, and thinking about what you just said, that everyday moments are important and integral, and these are things that we're already doing,
Mhm.
and we're looking at it from the positive angle. How can children recover if bad things happen, scary things happen, like violence, like abuse?
Yeah. One of the things that the science behind the building blocks of hope really goes just to your question. So we did a survey of adults in Wisconsin, and it was a random sample of all the adults in Wisconsin, reported in 2019. And we asked them about their childhood experiences, both positive and adverse. So then, if you take the group of adults who had four or more, what are called adverse childhood experiences, so those are three kinds of abuse and two kinds of neglect and five kinds of family dysfunction. So people had four or more of them. They had a really, really troubled childhood. But then we also asked them about seven possible positive childhood experiences. If they had only one or two of those, the majority of those adults with four or more ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, suffered from poor mental health or depression. However, if they had six or seven of the seven possible positive childhood experiences, only 21% had
Mhm.
depression or poor mental health. So think about that. These are adults who had really, really bad childhoods: abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, intimate partner violence, adult mental health issues, all kinds of stuff going on. But if they also had opportunities for strong relationships, for an environment where they could feel safe, places where they could live, learn, and grow, and be comfortable with that. If they were engaged, they felt like they mattered, opportunities for emotional growth, all of those things, they ended up healing. So the picture that emerges is really, really beautiful. Our bodies, and particularly our brains, are always responding to experiences, and we're infinitely capable of healing, but it
Mhm.
requires repetition, and it requires an environment that supports that, where we feel the love and we feel safe to explore and to deal with all the stuff that happened, and then we can heal. And in the old days, in the 20th century, it was thought that once these things happen to you, you're damaged like a coffee cup that gets shattered. But now we realize we're more like trees. So that branch got knocked off. You can look at the tree and see, huh, there used to be a branch there, but the tree grew past it. And that's what kids can do.
Mhm.
And so it's really important to never give up and to understand that our brains are literally wired to heal, and
Mhm.
that we know how to do that.
Yeah. And I guess if you could maybe expand a little bit on that in terms of, is are outcomes better if intervention is done earlier, or is there like a point at which there is no point of return sort of thing, Bob?
Okay, part of the last question is more philosophy, and I
Yes.
would say that once you've passed away and you're underground, there's no point of return. Until that moment, we're capable of healing.
Yeah.
Um, but going back to the other thing, I think that there are several things that I view as really important. One is, if the child had trauma and is suffering from problems, they can't sleep, they're having PTSD, whatever else is going on, they're suffering from depression, they should get professional help to help them with that problem. And with a professional knowing that maybe it arose from trauma, but get treatment for the depression or for whatever else is going on, because you need that. But but there are also a lot of people who have things that don't have like a clinical thing, like you're not clinically depressed, but you've had this trauma and sometimes things trigger it and you don't feel that you feel not quite yourself. And those are the areas where having positive experiences can help you heal, and they make us more resilient. If we have a strong childhood and then things happen to us later, they help us heal if we've had trauma and need to heal. And so there's nobody for whom these positive childhood experiences aren't appropriate. But for a child who's actually having symptoms and not able to function in their world, they will often need some professional help. And in that case, Um, we're really fortunate. There are evidence-based treatments for PTSD. There's really good treatments for depression
Mhm.
that you don't have to suffer endlessly from these mental health issues the way our ancestors did.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's great to be in the 21st century, but it's also important to realize that part of it is the disease things that happen, and part of it is just feeling whole. And these positive experiences help a person not just survive, but actually flourish.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Getting back to what you said, you in the survey, you surveyed about 12 different possible positive childhood experiences. Could you go through some of those? And then what, if any, effect does culture have on this?
Sure. So we looked at we had 7 specific items, and they were chosen honestly because they were well validated survey items.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do science, you can't like think of what's a good idea. You can think of what's a good idea, but at some point you have to go through a very long process to validate them. So
Yes.
we chose these 7 items from something called the Child and Youth Resilience Measure that was developed for the World Health Organization. And we chose that one because it's been used in a dozen countries. And adolescents and adults from a dozen countries understood the questions
Mm-hmm.
and it was valid.
Yeah.
So we tried to be really careful about that. Um, so, of those 7 questions, now this is like a little memory test. Let's see if I can get them all. Um, they're all in the form of thinking of yourself as a child until you're age 18. Oops.
I can still
Um,
hear you, Bob.
my camera's gone though. Let me see what I can do. What happened? Okay. You've frozen now.
Hmm.
Okay, now you've unfrozen.
Hold on one second. I can still hear you. But am I frozen on your end? Oh, there
No,
we
there
go.
you go. We're back.
Okay,
Okay. I don't
perfect.
know what happened, but there's something wrong.
This
But
is what happens in live,
okay.
so
So the experiences were how often did you, as a child, did you feel like you could talk to your family about your feelings?
mhm.
How often did you feel that your parents stood by you when times were tough? How often did you feel your friends stood by you in difficult times? How often did you feel a sense of belonging at high school? And I love that question because it's not what are your grades, were you a football star? It's how did you feel? Did you feel like you belonged? How often did you enjoy cultural traditions? And it doesn't say what those cultural traditions are, but did you feel part of that larger group of people? Um, how often was there an adult in your life who made you feel safe, or an adult in your home who made you feel safe at home? How often did you have 2 or more adults in addition to your parents who cared about you? And those are the kind of survey questions that were part of what we did to create these building blocks.
I love that. I love that. And I love that. Thank you for explaining the process by which you selected those questions, because I think um, that does impact, whether somebody who's participating in a study can really understand that and how generalizable it is later,
Yeah,
which is really important too.
absolutely.
So let's talk about COVID.
Okay,
The never ending, but what happened during this time to protect families during COVID? And I think this is an interesting question because most people are like, wait, what? Like, COVID happened to all of us, but it just seemed like this big thing and we were unprepared for it. But the way this is worded, it gives us some hints as to how you're going to answer this. So,
sure. Well, first of all, take as a given that almost all parents really love their children and would do anything for them.
yes.
Okay. And that's actually, you're a pediatrician, I'm a pediatrician. I love that. And
Hmm.
and sometimes parents are really nervous about are they doing the right thing, but it's not because they don't love their kids, right? So here's what we did as a society: we provided economic stabilization for families. So there was the stimulus checks, there was expanded unemployment insurance. Many, many, many people lost their jobs or had their hours cut back because the world was kind of shut down, right?
Hmm.
But we provided unemployment benefits, so they still got some money coming in. The CDC ordered an eviction moratorium, so families couldn't lose their homes. The federal government increased food supports through the SNAP program, so families got more food. The Congress passed the refundable child tax credit, so families got more cash. So one thing we did as a society is we provided financial stability. Pretty cool.
Hmm.
And we know that families that are financially stressed, it's really hard. So that's one thing you can see from the policy thing. And then we interviewed parents, and we're finishing the analysis of um, not interviews, but open-ended questions with 3,000 parents of kids 0 to 5 during the pandemic. And what we found was, first of all, parents were stressed. Okay, 60% of parents said they were very stressed. Like, boy, that's no surprise, right?
Hmm.
And that's because their children's lives were disrupted, school, after school, everything. So you think, what a disaster, right? Parents are out of a job, kids are out of school. This is going to be terrible. What we found, though, was that parents liked having more time with their kids. Life was a little bit less hurried. And if they had that financial support, they were able to deal with that. And so those very same parents who said they were very stressed also said that their relationships with their children deepened and they had positive experiences. So during COVID, um, fam as a society, and I can go on, the home visitors who made contact with families, and they couldn't go in the home, but they called them up. The school principal who told us that he called every child in his K through 8 school to see how they were doing. School bus drivers who drove around their rural routes and delivered food to people who needed it because the kids weren't getting school lunch. Um, all those things, formal and informal. So that was really helpful. But I think that the mental health crisis happened because, particularly teenagers, I mentioned that one of the building blocks of hope is engagement. And teenagers were really isolated. So they weren't able to feel useful, to it's very difficult to feel like you were contributing anything. School, instead of being an environment where it was like a peer environment and there's teacher people who demand you do things, but you were really with your peers doing all those things, that was gone. And it was just you and the teacher and maybe the other kids on some Zoom screen. That was really hard. And it's really easy for children to feel that they didn't matter, that they were just the passive recipients. And honestly, it's really hard to engage. And many children fell behind academically, and almost all children fell behind socially. Because
Hmm.
when I talked about emotional growth, I said it happens from peer interaction, right? If you
Yes.
read your child all these books about emotional growth, it's a great thing to do as a parent, but it's not the same as your child actually having these experiences, either out in nature or with other kids.
Hmm.
So kids really fell behind. And I think that it's not surprising that the crisis in mental health happened not during the depths of COVID when there was a lockdown, but now as we're returning and trying to get back to normal. And that the kids and teenagers especially are really having a hard time adjusting. And I'm sure that they'll get better, but it's a very difficult time. And we're not really equipped to provide all the support that so many kids need because things just aren't, all the infrastructure that supported kids which just isn't there anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what you said is really important to point out. I mean, first of all, um, it has, and also I think from, if there is a silver lining as well, what you said, that parents really had the time, like their schedules kind of, cleared, and
Yep.
they got to re-experience what it was like to just have time to just spend with each other. But also, I think it's also helped organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics really talk about why mental health is important.
Yep.
We're now talking about it more freely. And now, unfortunately, we've shined a light on some shortcomings and what we need to do to fill in the gaps. But I think uh,
Hmm.
it's much more acceptable to have those conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another thing, as long as you're talking about mental health and brains.
Yes.
There's some studies, particularly out of Japan, after a terrible earthquake in northwest Japan, something called post-traumatic growth. Everybody knows about post-traumatic stress, right?
Uh huh. Yes.
Also something called post-traumatic growth, which our brains grow and change, and you can see it in magnetic resonance imaging. And you look at the brain, right? that there are changes in parts of our brain that are responsible for what's called executive function or how we make decisions. And the hallmarks of that are you get closer to the people who went through the trauma with you, and you get a little more humble, a little more sense of awe. And people will look back on that experience in a pretty special way. And for all of us, if we know someone who's been in the military during a war, you know about that because the men usually who were in the war together are very close. They went through that experience together.
Hmm.
So obviously, there's post-traumatic stress. There's all kinds of things. There's also post-traumatic growth, and I think that we're beginning to see that with parents and kids. They went through this together, and it's an experience that they will always have as a family if they went through this traumatic thing together. And as they recover, um, that's going to be very, very important to do everything we can to promote post-traumatic growth instead of post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, I think if people are interested to learn more about hope and the work that you do, let's talk about that. Tell us about the website and where they can do more reading, find more
Sure.
resources.
We have a wonderful website. It's called positiveexperience.org. And on that website, we have a couple of things. We have pages of resources. If you're a parent or a teacher or a health professional, we have resources that are for you, that are about the four building blocks of hope, that are stories that go into it. And one of my favorite features is we have a blog. So people around the country who are doing really interesting things that promote these positive experiences, able to have a place to reach out and talk about their work. And we do everything we can. So we've had people talk about the experience of Black children growing up. We've had people talk about the importance of early relational health, have people talking about youth collaboratives and what the kids are doing. And it's a wonderful thing to look at. If people are interested and really want to get into it, we have an online course you can take. It takes about an hour and uh, 5 modules, about 20 minutes each, whatever that adds up to.
Hmm.
So you can learn about the basic building blocks of hope.
Hmm.
Um, and for professionals, we have a variety of training opportunities. So we're really out there. You can reach us out through the website or through email or through Twitter. Let us know your stories. What makes it work for you? Do you have stories of people who had a terrible childhood and ended up being admirable people? What happened? How do we make sure that more kids have that? And what can we do as a society to protect children and families so they can have these key positive experiences that children need for optimal growth and development?
Hmm. Just to clarify, though, so you mentioned that module on the website. Is that one for parents or for educators?
The one we have out now is currently designed for professionals, people who work with children.
Okay.
Um, it is, if parents can look at it, there are no secrets there.
Hmm.
And some parents will find it really interesting. And we're working on that. We have a new network called the Family and Community Experts, or the FACE of Hope. And they're helping us make more parent-directed materials so we can do that.
Uh,
And Narissa, you and I both work with the American Academy of Pediatrics. Healthychildren.org has a lot of materials around positive experiences. They published our survey results of parents during COVID. A lot of resources available through the American Academy of Pediatrics. Because Bright Futures, which is what we all use to think about the future, really includes all these protective factors. And it's so important to think about it. And the message that I want parents to have is that have fun with your kids. I think like the best factor, when I look at a family and say, is this family going to be okay? Is that the parents smile and brag about their kids and they had fun and they went hiking or biking or playing catch or playing silly games. Joy is really important. Parents can do that, and we have to worry about the bad stuff, but also enjoy the good stuff, the relationships within the family and at school, the environment you set up so children feel comfortable exploring their curiosity and they feel safe, feeling engaged, feeling like they're important, and helping them go into activities where they really do matter. and creating opportunities for emotional growth, and then sitting back and watching it happen. It's amazing how powerful that can be and how much joy that can bring to parents and the whole family.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you get the front row ticket to that, journey.
Yep.
Yeah, I love
Yep.
it. I love it. Um, yeah, so we're about time. And so if you're watching this either live or on replay and you have thoughts, anything struck you, or if you have questions, don't be shy. Post it in the comments. Myself or my team will be looking for those, and then we can follow up with you or send questions that we can't answer to Bob, and he can shoot a response. But the whole thing is so thought provoking. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this because this work is so important. And thank you so much for sharing what you're doing.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I look forward to getting some comments from people who watch this. Comments or even stories
Yeah.
about your own family or someone who you admire.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you heard it. Please don't be shy. If you've got a story or know someone who can contribute to those stories, please direct them to that website. We'll put that link in the show notes so that you can just click on it and head right over and check that out. So I do want to tell you that next week, my guest will be Dr. Manasa Mantravadi, who will be chatting about people and the planet are connected and how that led to her building her company, Ahimsa. And also for those of you who are reading our current book club, Breaking Free of Child Anxiety and OCD. This book we started in June. We're reading through August, and Dr. Leibovitz will be joining me for a virtual book club author chat. And information on how to get your ticket to that event will be shared with you guys next week. So please make sure if you're not reading it yet, but it's intriguing to you, please pick that up. It's a great book. And as always, if you have any other guests or other topics that you'd like to share and have us talk about on this show, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can contact me by email at drnarissa@letstalkkidshealth.org. And then on any of my social media platforms, you can always just send me a message there if that's easier. Well, thanks so much for chatting with us tonight. Bob, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you all. We'll see you next week.